Now we will discuss how HIV lives to kill. And this section will focus on the lymphocyte, the host cell for HIV. And once you understand about the lymphocyte, then you will understand why HIV is so deadly. So the learning objectives for the second part are to describe the immune functions of the CD4 T lymphocyte, which is the host cell, to differentiate the immune host cells by their co-receptors, and you'll find out that there are more than one host cell, although the lymphocyte is the primary one. Also, it's important to know and describe how CD4 T lymphocytes become depleted and what the clinical consequences of that are. Also, I'll talk a little bit about correlating CD4 number. So if you can correlate the CD4 number, antibody level, and virus level with the clinical symptoms, and then the eventual development of the AIDS disease. So what is a CD4 lymphocyte? Now, we have a number of immune cells, and one major group of immune cells that we have to fight off infection are called lymphocytes. The two major types of lymphocytes are T cells or T lymphocytes and B cells or B lymphocytes. And they each have their distinct jobs. B lymphocytes' major job is to produce antibodies. And antibodies are basically produced by B lymphocytes against anything foreign or altered that they see. They're very specific, and they react to only one type of infectious agent or one type of invader. The T lymphocytes are your other major type of lymphocytes, and they have actually varied jobs, and they have a few subgroups. We have what we call CD4 T lymphocytes and CD8 T lymphocytes. And they are named after their little protein receptors on their surface. CD8 T lymphocytes are called CD8 because they have that CD8 protein on their surface. This actually serves a function in the immune response, and that function is to act as part of the attachment with other immune cells and also in reacting to the various foreign invaders. The major job of CD8 T lymphocytes is to kill cells that are infected inside of them, so they have like a virus or bacteria inside of them. And because their major job is to kill, we call another name for these CD8 T lymphs is cytotoxic lymphocytes. And we'll actually talk about these again a little bit later. However, the major lymphocyte we're interested in now is the CD4 T lymphocyte. And that one, as we mentioned a few times, is the host cell for the HIV virus. There are a number of functions of the CD4 T lymphocyte, but to make it rather simple, just to mention its other name will kind of say what it does. It's also known as a helper cell or a helper lymphocyte. And in fact, the CD4 T lymphocyte helps other immune cells in really a myriad of functions. And your slide shows you two of those major functions. One major function is to help activate another immune cell called a macrophage. You may have heard of macrophages, and they're very non-specific immune cells, and basically what they do is chomp up various microbes, internalize them, and then destroy them with chemicals inside of them. However, macrophages in the beginning actually need the help of CD4 T lymphocytes to get activated, to really do a good job of it. However, in turn, the macrophage also helps the CD4 T lymphocyte because it presents the protein or the antigen that the CD4 T lymphocyte needs in order to become activated itself. So it's sort of a co-activation that goes on. Another important job of the helper or CD4 T lymphocyte is to help activate that B lymphocyte we just talked about. And the B lymphocyte will show the invader to the T lymphocyte, and in turn the T helper lymphocyte will help that B lymphocyte get activated by helping it replicate, by helping it helping induce its antibody production. And the helper T lymphocyte does this by secreting chemicals or proteins that we call cytokines, and these cytokines affect many immune cells. So there are, although the CD4 T lymph are the major host cell for HIV virus, there are other immune cells that actually can host the HIV virus. One of those is actually the macrophage we just mentioned. Another one is a cell we haven't mentioned yet, and that's the dendritic cell. A dendritic cell is similar to a macrophage in that it will internalize an invading organism, but it's not quite so good at destroying it. It's mainly there to help the helper lymphocyte, which in turn goes on to help the macrophage. So all of these immune cells are invaded via the two receptors, CD4 and either CCR5 or another co-receptor called CXCR4. There is a great deal of research about these various co-receptors and is beyond the scope of this course, but they do become very important in the HIV invasion and who is susceptible to it and who is not. So how do the CD4 lymphocytes become depleted as a result of this HIV infection? Certainly it's intuitive that if something is growing inside of the cell and then utilizes that cell to replicate itself and then, buds off and essentially uses up that cell, that it would die. And indeed, that does happen. And so over the course of a disease, the infected cell will become depleted simply by virtue of the viral invasion. And this can be said about any type of virus in any cell. However, there's another piece to this, and that is that because the virus lives in an immune cell, other immune responses do recognize this. They do see that there's something wrong here. For instance, the B lymphocyte starts producing antibodies to the virus and tries to destroy the virus that way. But mainly the CD8 cytotoxic T cell sees that infected CD4 cell and says to itself, oh, this is an infected cell, I need to kill it. And so some of our depletion of CD4 lymphocytes is actually due to our own immune response causing these CD4 lymphs to deplete. As you see in the slide, though, a person with a healthy immune system to begin with generally can cope with cells being destroyed. They will make more in response. This only works so long, however. So this next slide shows you the graph of the depletion of CD4 lymphocytes over the course of the HIV life cycle and the course of the disease, which eventually leads to AIDS. And if you look in the beginning, when you first become infected with HIV, that you have 1,000 or greater CD4 T lymphs per microliter of blood. And when the infection begins, they rapidly replicate and they start to take over lymphocytes very, very fast, and they become depleted so rapidly. So you see that by the dip there below 500 CD4 lymphs per microliter of blood. However, like I said, your other immune responses start to kick in. And though they do need the help of the T helper, the CD4 lymph, they can do quite a lot simply on their own, at least for a while. And you'll see that now after the other immune responses kick in, the CD4 count starts to go back up. And though it may never get to what it originally was, since this virus was not cleared, it is continuing, you do have plenty of helper lymphocytes to maintain a healthy immune response. And depending on the individual, this could continue, this sort of status quo can continue for months to years, up to 10 years or more. But eventually, the immune system becomes exhausted. You might mention it that way, that it just can't keep up anymore. And you can't keep making more CD4 T lymphs, and eventually the HIV gets the upper hand, and your CD4 lymphs fall below 500 per microliter. And this is referred to then as the symptomatic phase. And you can start to show increased infections, especially by organisms that we call opportunistic organisms that normally don't cause a problem in someone with a healthy immune system. It's often at this point that people first become aware that they could possibly have an infection, because up to this point, you have a basically healthy immune system. And once this symptomatic phase kicks in, if there's no treatment, then it will continue to deplete. And once the cell count goes below 200 CD4 T lymphs per microliter of blood, we now call this the full-blown AIDS disease acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So this next slide correlates numbers of the various immune cells as well as what we call the viral load, or the number of viruses. And it shows it once again over time, but what you should spend a little time looking at is when the viral load increases, how eventually all of our immune responses start to go down. And remember, the reason for that is that they do require T cell help. And so as your CD4 T lymphs are depleted, so too you start to have a harder time making antibody, and your CD8 T lymphs also start to wane. So in summary of this second part, the CD4 lymphocytes are the major host cell for HIV, and they are so important because they're essential in activating other immune cells, such as macrophages, and they also help B cells to produce antibodies. Over time, the CD4 lymphocytes become depleted through the activity of the HIV itself. And because other immune cells destroy these infected CD4 T cells, as well as the virus itself being harmful to them, the CD4 cells become depleted. Symptoms, however, do not usually show up until the CD4 count falls below 500 cells per microliter of blood. And when the count falls below 200 microliters of blood, then we get the full-blown AIDS disease, which entails becoming very sick from a number of opportunistic invaders.